Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is TVP World. You're watching World News Tonight. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. A massive overnight assault on Kyiv leaves dozens injured as Russia unleashes one of the most intense aerial attacks of the war. More on that in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. EU sweeping new sanctions to strangle Russia's war machine. Poland urges calm as Trump threatens tariffs on EU goods. Mass protests rock Budapest over bill targeting media and NGOs. Kyiv came under one of the heaviest aerial attacks of the war overnight as Russia launched waves of missiles and drones, injuring at least 15 people in the capital alone and damaging residential buildings. The assault came as Ukraine and Russia carried out a major prisoner swap. Our Kyiv correspondent Oz Kadici has more. Oz, can you tell us what the situation on the ground is?
Well, there was a lot of anger following these strikes, a difficult night for all of Ukraine. That's how Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky described it. This morning, we had 250 drones and at least 14 missiles fired by Russia on the territory of Ukraine. 15 people needed medical attention in the capital, Kyiv. However, the total death toll and injury toll from the Russian attacks in the last 24 hours is up to 9 people killed and 47 injured around the country. President Zelensky said that Odessa, Vinnytsia, Sumy, Kharkiv, Donetsk, Kyiv, and Dnipro were hit in Russia's overnight bombardment. There was anger on the ground, talking to Kyiv residents. There remains a lot of anger that these attacks continue to happen during this period of supposed negotiations. Let's take a listen to some of the opinions of those residents.
I heard Shaheds flying over maybe 8 to 10 times. They're very loud. Everyone knows the sound of their engine, and then comes the explosion.
The kids called me at 3 a.m. screaming, "Mom, we got hit. The balcony is on fire." I told them to grab the documents and the cats. The Russians are beasts. I'd like Trump to see this. I don't know what kind of person he is. Not smart, lost his mind. Can he really not see what Putin is doing? It is not a war. It's the destruction of a people. They are just destroying us. The Russians are not concerned about children or anyone. They just attack over and over. Drones were flying over us the whole night. We had no time to rest. Poor children. My 3-year-old granddaughter was screaming scared. Of course, I wish they would accept the ceasefire, but he doesn't want to, Putin.
War is war. No one is safe here.
So again, a very difficult night here in the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, Benjamin.
While please do stay safe out there. Appreciate it. The European Union is preparing its 18th round of sanctions on Russia. The measure could disconnect more than 20 banks from the SWIFT payment system and tighten the oil price cap. Officials are also weighing new steps to address the continued flow of Russian gas through the Nord Stream pipeline. The sweeping package is designed to further strangle Moscow's revenue, limiting its war chest.
In another sweeping move targeting Russia's national revenues, used to prop up its aggression against Ukraine, the EU is set to discuss an 18th sanction package against Moscow, according to media reports. The comprehensive sanctions package looks to disconnect more than 20 Russian banks from the global financial communications and payments network SWIFT. Russian energy exports are set to be targeted too. This would include such actions as lowering the oil price ceiling to $45 per barrel, down from the $60 agreed upon in 2022. Banning the Nord Stream gas pipeline is also on the table, though according to experts, this in itself may not be enough to eliminate the import of Russian gas to the EU.
There's been a staggering increase of imports by European countries from Russia using LNG. The question is, of course, to what extent these sanctions will have impact. I mean, sanctions by definitions harmful for both sides.
Apart from LNG imports, Russia has also been able to utilize proxies to direct its resource flows to Europe.
The problem is that there are so many creative ways for Russians to overcome these problems through Kazakhstan, through other countries, even from China.
These new trade restrictions, said to be worth about 2.5 billion euros, would serve as an extension of the sanctions imposed by the G7+ coalition, which has spearheaded efforts to counter Russia's trade influence.
G7 has announced that any company that cooperates with Russia now will be excluded from reconstruction of Ukraine. So that is a clear signal to all the Chinese companies, Indian or other companies, that they should keep away from any business with Russia.
This initiative comes at a time when Europe appears to be redoubling its efforts to deal decisive blows to the Russian economy. On Tuesday, the EU, together with the UK, approved a 17th sanction package against Russia, which blacklisted an additional 189 oil tankers and other vessels listed as part of the shadow fleet covertly trading Russian oil and gas.
We'll probably witness the military ships as well being included. There is an expansion of the definition of the shadow fleet here for sure.
The proposals are currently being reviewed by the European Commission in consultation with member states. EU sanctions require unanimous approval from all 27 nations, and details of the package could still change before formal adoption. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Poland is urging calm after U.S. President Donald Trump proposed a 50% tariff on European goods starting January 1st. Speaking for the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU, Polish Deputy Minister of Development and Technology Michał Baranowski said that negotiations with Washington are ongoing and that public statements may not reflect actual U.S. policy decisions.
The Polish Deputy Minister of Development and Technology is convinced that the EU will reach a trade deal with the United States, but acknowledges that the road to it might be bumpy.
Thank you very much.
The EU and the US are negotiating. Some parties are negotiating behind closed doors, others more publicly. The Commission is the main negotiator and has full support from all member states. The fact that we see some important statements in the public domain does not mean that they will translate into actions of the US administration.
Michał Baranowski's statement follows Donald Trump's warning that a 50% tariff on goods from the European Union may be imposed as of June 1st, which the American president has since reiterated.
I'm not looking for a deal. We've set the deal. It's at 50%.
I think our minister is absolutely on point. The negotiations are ongoing. Of course they are. In my view, Donald Trump is really tired of the trade stuff. I think he wants to wrap it up. He wants to score some quick wins and move on to other items on his agenda.
The European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see.
In early April, Trump both introduced and paused reciprocal tariffs on Europe for 90 days to negotiate a trade deal with the EU, a window which would last until July 8. However, the EU is still subject to Trump's baseline and industrial goods tariffs.
If we analyze every single trade move that the tariff move that the Trump administration has done from the beginning, there's always an escalation, very high demands, very high tariffs, and immediately after that, there is a compromise.
But if implemented, a 50% tariff could be detrimental for transatlantic trade.
That is going to stop trade on most of the things that the 50% will hit. And let's remember, a lot of the trade between the United States and the EU, it's carried out by multinational companies. If Trump really hits EU-US trade with 50%, he is going to be hitting a lot of US companies.
European Commissioner for Trade Maroš Šefčovič has reaffirmed the EU's full commitment to securing a mutually beneficial trade deal.
EU-US trade is unmatched and must be guided by mutual respect, not threats. We stand ready to defend our interests.
Trump's threats of 50% tariffs on the EU led to a sharp drop of European shares on Friday. According to Baranowski, Šefčovič is to meet with U.S. Chief Negotiator Jamieson Greer in early June in Paris. Another opportunity to speak about concrete aspects of a deal. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabišćan.
Newly elected Romanian President Michał has announced that he will visit Warsaw on Sunday. Now, in the morning, he is set to meet with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk and later take part in a rally for presidential candidate Rafał Trzaskowski ahead of the June 1st runoff. Dan said the invitation came from his Polish colleagues. The 2025 presidential election are taking place around the same time in both Poland and Romania, and politicians in each country have openly backed their ideological counterparts. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk publicly endorsed Michał, who is seen as a pro-EU candidate. Now, as president-elect, Don is returning the gesture by attending a rally for Rafał Trzaskowski, who represents Poland's ruling coalition. Along with their shared pro-European stance, the two also have similar backgrounds. Trzaskowski is the mayor of Warsaw, while Don previously served as mayor of Bucharest. Before the first round of voting in Poland, Romania's right-wing nationalist candidate George Simeon also appeared at a rally for opposition candidate Karol Nawrocki. As protests erupt in Budapest over a bill targeting foreign-funded media and NGOs, Hungary's political divide is growing deeper. Critics said the legislation mirrors authoritarian tactics. Meanwhile, opposition leader Peter Magyar is rallying support beyond the border, reaching out to ethnic Hungarians in Romania just months before the 2026 election.
To reach ethnic Hungarians in Romania and win their support, that is the goal of the Hungarian opposition leader Peter Magyar's week-long journey. And the clock is ticking. Parliamentary elections are in less than a year, in April 2026.
It is not by chance that there is a huge outrage from the ethnic Hungarians in Romania. They have expected lots of things from many people, but I think they were surprised that their very own Viktor Orbán, who has always claimed that he is a great supporter of the ethnic Hungarians, has put a knife in their back for the sake of foreign policy interests.
In the recent presidential election in Romania, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán publicly supported hard-right candidate George Simeon. This upset many Hungarians in Romania, as Simeon started his political career by stirring up hatred and joining extremist Romanian groups to attack a Hungarian military cemetery.
Orbán had a very strong support among minority Hungarians in neighboring countries, mainly in Romania, Slovakia, and Serbia. And now Peter Magyar is seemingly returning this tendency.
Orbán's government provides funding to ethnic Hungarian communities in Romania. In 2014, it extended voting rights to Hungarians living abroad. In the 2022 parliamentary elections, 94% of these voters supported Fidesz. A recent poll, however, shows that Magyar's center-right TISA party currently leads with 43% support among decided voters, while Fidesz trails at 36%. Meanwhile, protests in Budapest continue against a draft bill submitted by Orbán's party aimed at restricting foreign-funded media and human rights groups.
If there is an NGO funded by Russia who says that Vladimir Putin is a great guy and Viktor Orbán is very right to follow his every single order in the European Council, then it is perfectly fine. If you are a journalist receiving an EU grant, writing about Vladimir Putin as a war criminal and Viktor Orbán is complicit in supporting them, then he has a problem. So this law is directly out of Putin's playbook.
The bill would allow the government to monitor the bank accounts of such parties. Funds from abroad considered a threat to Hungarian sovereignty could be blocked, and authorities would be allowed to enter the offices of these organizations, as well as access their documents and devices.
Orbán is going until the wall, and even beyond. For the time being, after almost 16 years of continuous governance, his regime is in a life danger. So I think he is very much decided to do what he wants to do.
The vote on the controversial bill has been scheduled for June, with approval extremely likely, as Fidesz has an absolute majority in parliament.
Saturday marks day 2 of the largest prisoner of war exchange between Ukraine and Russia since the outbreak of the war. A total of 200 prisoners of war were exchanged today as the suggestion of U.S. President Donald Trump. And let's take a look at what the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has to say about the exchange.
Another 200 of our soldiers have returned home, mostly privates and sergeants. Included in this group are members of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the National Guard, as well as the State Border Guard. These people were captured mostly in the Donetsk region, but also in Kherson, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv and Lugansk. In total, 200 Ukrainians have returned home in 2 days of exchanges. Tomorrow is the third stage. We have to release them, thousands of our people. But the ultimate task is to release absolutely everyone who is currently being held in Russia. This is a common task for our intelligence agencies, for our diplomats, for our entire state. It is clear that this task is not easy, but it must be completed.
Meanwhile, Poland's presidential runoff campaign intensifies as Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski lay out key positions during a live-stream debate hosted by third-place candidate Sławomir Mencen. Trzaskowski ruled out adopting the euro and offers full support for Ukraine's NATO membership. More updates coming up on TVP World, and for full coverage, visit tvpworld.com. Now, under a barrage of drone and missile strikes on Kyiv, the EU is rolling out new sanction packages targeting Russia's economy. Yet, just as Brussels stepped up pressure on Moscow, the United States has announced sweeping tariffs on EU goods, raising fears of a transatlantic rift. With Trump casting doubt on Ukraine peace prospects, economic and strategic unity is under strain. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack these developments is Diane Francis, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and noted expert on transatlantic relations and global economy policy. Ma'am, welcome to TVP World.
Good to be here.
So first, can we take a look at the newest sanction and how is that going to affect Russia's war coffer? How does that differ from the ones that we've seen before?
Well, you're talking about the European sanctions?
There's supposedly a 17th package in rolling out, and they've been discussing an 18th package as well.
Yes. Well, the 17th package really does increase the pressure on Russia. And in particular, I mean, not enough for many of us, but it's better than it was before, for sure. And interestingly, it does finally target the naval warfare that they've been undergoing in the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, cutting cables, and then, of course, having all these shadow ships that are transporting oil tankers, taking illicit oil from Russia to China and India to finance the war against Ukraine. So if they can, attach and attack and interdict many of those ships, you're really going to hurt the cash flow of the war that will prevent Putin from killing more people, hopefully.
Right, I'm reading into the details of the 18th package that is being discussed right now, and one of the things that stick out to me is that, well, they're talking about sanctioning the Nord Stream pipeline, which comes to me as quite a surprise. I thought that it's probably already included in the sanctions somehow. Why is that still not being sanctioned? And do you think that the fact that it's being talked about right now is a good sign that Europe is going to really hit Russia where it hurts?
Well, the oil flow is the problem. That's the only cash flow he has. That country is desperately poor. It has no industry except industrial military industry. All it does is pump out oil and resources. I mean, it's just an underdeveloped nation, 11 time zones long. And if you cut the lifeline for Putin's war, which is the oil revenues, you can squeeze him out of that war very quickly and prevent him certainly from expanding it. And that should have been done a long time ago, and for some reason hasn't. Now, I think the 17th package also goes after all the intermediaries, and these include countries and companies, organizations in Abu Dhabi, Kazakhstan, Turkey, all over the place who have facilitated this illicit shipping of oil despite sanctions. And that's also a good sign.
All right, like you mentioned, a lot of times Russians have been using a very roundabout way to skirt these sanctions. So would you say that these sanctions right now will target some of these through secondary means?
Yes, I think it'll do a good job. But getting back to your question about the pipeline, I mean, that thing should have been blown up a long time ago. That really is why we have a war. We have a war with Russia because they were able to build pipelines and try to make Germany and the rest of Europe dependent on their oil and gas. And that way they wouldn't have to use the transmission lines through Ukraine, which enabled them to invade it. They didn't invade. They would have invaded it earlier had they been able to, but they had pipelines they relied on to get their oil and gas to Europe. So they built these ones circumventing, going around Ukraine, one of which was that northern pipeline, another one through Turkey. And that was really all designed to prepare themselves to invade Ukraine. And, those pipelines should never be opened, ever.
Right now, we are talking about the sanctions, but then at this very critical juncture, the United States also announced threatening a 50% tariff on EU goods as well. How's that going to impact the EU's economical resilience?
Well, it's unbelievable what's going on. I mean, Trump not only walked away from getting anything done with Putin, which was pretty shocking, even though he had a lot of leverage to force him to make compromises and so on, he didn't do it. Now he's opened up a second front, a second front for Europe. In other words, Europe's not only got to fight the Russians and help Ukraine and protect itself on its eastern flank, but now it's got America slapping tariffs on its manufactured goods, very high tariffs. So they've got an economic war with a former ally. It's really quite strange. The world, Trump is so disruptive. It's quite shocking. Putin, of course, is always going to be destructive and difficult, but it's not helpful because in addition to increasing their defense and military spending, Europe now has to fend off as much of the tariff threat from the United States as it can. But whatever happens, they're still going to be hurt economically because the tariffs are going to hurt exports.
All right. So do you think that this tariff could actually undermine EU sanction against Russia and maybe even have implications causing a rift when it comes to transatlantic unity?
Well, it certainly is. It represents a rift with transatlantic community, with the alliance. But I think that he's doing this with everyone. I mean, he's slapped tariffs on every country in the world. So it's really not necessarily anything to do with. But what I find strange is that he has at his fingertips a congressional bill that would allow him to hit Russia with 500% tariffs, and he hasn't, and he didn't use that as leverage when he was doing talks with them. He just walked away and gave up everything. So it really does look like they're in cahoots. I don't think they are, but he certainly is not behaving like a partner.
Right now, given President Trump's recent statement about Putin's unwillingness to end the war, how might that influence EU's strategic approach to the conflict?
Well, I don't think that's news. He was saying it in light of the fact that, I can't stop him from continuing the war through these negotiations. That was the context in which he said that. But I think we all have already known, including the United States, that Putin doesn't want to end this war. He wants Ukraine. He wants all of it. And if he has to bide his time and wait, stop, have a ceasefire, and then reintroduce troops again, he will. But he just this is his thing. And we know, of course, that he doesn't want to stop with Ukraine. He wants to recreate the USSR, which means the Warsaw Pact countries and whatever else he can grab. I mean, he's an imperialist. He's a conqueror.
Now, since the beginning of Trump's administration, he was quite confident about being able to come to the negotiation table with Vladimir Putin. And recently, he did make that statement about Putin not wanting peace. I think it's a sign that Washington finally realized that, well, what we know here in Europe know already, that Putin really don't want to stop this war. Do you think that that might signal a change when it comes to Washington's stance and some of its action towards its European partners? Or do you think that perhaps Donald Trump will still continue to take down the same path?
Well, I think Donald Trump was either very naive or he's lazy. Or just completely miscalculated. For him to not realize that Putin had no intention of peace talks, resolving the situation, other than to his satisfaction. And for Trump to think that he could sit and talk him into some kind of compromise or peace-loving nature was, naive. He also, though, I think, thought he could scare Putin, and nothing scares Putin. Nothing.
Right, now coming back to the tariffs on Europe as well as the sanction, how might Europe be able to leverage its economic or political tools to perhaps counterbalance some of these tariff threats while still maintaining pressure on Russia?
Well, Europeans are going to have to make some really tough decisions. And of course, the leaders of Europe, I say the leaders in the European alliance have been Poland and Britain and France. Now Germany has a new leader that has come out foursquare, totally against Russia's war. And that's important because Germany is the richest country in Europe and the fourth richest on the planet. When you get a Germany saying enough already and we're going to do things. So we saw that the day after Trump walked away from talks with Putin, Germany sent troops for the first time since the Second World War into another country. And so they sent them to Lithuania to guard the Baltics, because the Baltics, like Poland, like Romania, Bulgaria, and everybody along the borderline, are vulnerable to Putin's imperialist ambitions. And so I think that you see a new, bolder Europe, and it's going to be painful. Europe has a lot of welfare states. People live really easy. It's very comfortable in Europe, and a lot of people in Europe, particularly in Western Europe, don't feel the impact of the war as the Poles or even the Germans now do, and certainly the Scandinavians. So, Europe has got to get its act together. There's just no question, and it's going to be costly, but it needs doing. And, they're also benefited greatly by the fact that Ukraine has probably one of the best militaries in the world.
Right, like I mentioned, this is not going to be an easy task going forward, and a lot of European leaders might have to step up and take the leadership role, but that's probably also going to have an economic impact within the country as well. Do you think that might actually have some impact on the political will of these individual countries to pursue these, be it sanctions, be it support for Ukraine?
Absolutely. I mean, in democracies, that's the way it is. I mean, it doesn't have to be staggering expenses, but they are going to have to trim welfare benefits to European citizens, and they're going to have to tax them more, and their companies. So it's a squeeze, but I don't see any way out of it. They've been underfunded. Their defenses have been underfunded for ages, and now they're playing catch up. And that means countries that don't feel the war's effects very much, like Spain and Portugal, Luxembourg, they all have to pony up. This is a continent that's at risk.
Right, and of course, with a bit of strained relation between the U.S. and Europe, do you think that this is going to be sustainable going forward? Do you think these countries aforementioned will have the will to carry it out? Are you optimistic?
I'm absolutely optimistic. Look, I think one of the things that you can't mistake is that Trump really attacked NATO and Europe, but he attacked them because they were freeloading on the United States. The U.S. was paying most of the NATO bills and providing most of the military protection with troops on the ground in Germany and so on. And that's what he was angry about, and that's what he was announcing and said he wanted to withdraw. It's not that he doesn't want Europe to defend itself, but he doesn't want American taxpayers to pay for it. He wants European taxpayers to pay for it. And I think that's actually just plain fair. And if Europeans don't want to pay for it, they're going to pay a price.
And thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Anytime. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World News Tonight. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.